As soon as he sat before him, the Messenger of Allah, PBUH, thanked Allah and praised him, then said, "What makes you flee? Do you flee lest you should say there is no God but Allah? Do you know any other God but Allah?" "No," he said, then talked for a while. The Messenger of Allah went on saying, "Certainly you flee so that you may not hear the statement saying Allah is the greatest. Do you know anyone who is greater than Allah?" "No," he said. "The Jews are those whose portion is wrath, and the Christians are those who have gone astray." The Prophet retorted, "I am a Muslim and I believe in one God, Allah." Adi finally proclaimed with a joyous face. The Prophet ordered him a residence with one of the helpers. From that time he started calling at the Prophet, PBUH, in the mornings and in the evenings. Zad al-Mad 205. On the authority of Ibn Ishaq, when the Prophet, PBUH, made him sit down in front of him in his house, the Prophet said, "O Adi, were you not cast in disbelief?" "Yes." Adi said, "Did you not share 1/4 of your people's gains?" "Yes." Said Adi. The Messenger of Allah, PBUH, said, "It is sinful in your religion to do such a thing, and you should not allow yourself to do it." "Yes, by Allah, that is true," said Adi. Thus I worked out that he was a prophet inspired by Allah, and sent to people. He knows what is unknown. Ibn Hisham 2581, in another version, the Prophet, PBUH, said, "Adi, embrace Islam and you shall be secure." "But I am a man of religion," said Adi. "I know your religion better than you." Said the Prophet, "Do you know my religion better than me?" Adi asked. The Prophet replied, "Yes." He said, "Are you not cast in disbelief because you appropriate to yourself the fourth of your people's gains?" "Yes." Said Adi. "It is unlawful in your religion to do such a thing." The Prophet said, and Adi added, "He did not need to say it again for I immediately acquiesced it." Musnad Imam Ahmad, al-Bukhari narrates that Adi said, "While we were with the Prophet, PBUH, a man came in and complained to him about poverty. Then another man came in and complained about highway robbery. The Messenger of Allah, PBUH, then said, O Adi, have you ever been to Al-Hira? If you were doomed to live a long life, you would be able to see a riding camel woman travel from Hira till it circumambulates Al-Kaaba fearing none but Allah, and if you were to live long enough you would open the treasures of Kisra. And if you were to live long you would be able to see a man offering a handful of gold or silver to others but none accepts to take it." At the end of this hadith Adi, later on, says, "I have seen a riding camel woman travel from Al-Hira till it circumambulates the Kaaba fearing none but Allah. I have also been one of those who opened the treasures of Kisra bin Hermes." If you were to live a long life you would witness what the Prophet, Abul Qasim, PBUH, had already said about offering a handful of, i.e. the Prophet's prophecies, did really come true. Sahih al-Bukhari, Mishkat al-Masibi 2524. The invasion of Tabuk in Rajab, in the year 9H. The invasion and the conquest of Makkah were considered a decisive one between the truth and the error. As a result of which, the Arabs had no more doubt in Muhammad's mission. Thus we see that things went contrary to the pagans' expectations. People started to embrace Islam, the religion of Allah, in great numbers. This is manifested clearly in the chapter, the delegations, of this book. It can also be deduced from the enormous number of people who shared in the Hajjat al-Wada, farewell pilgrimage. All domestic troubles came to an end. Muslims eventually felt at ease and started setting up the teachings of Allah's laws and intensifying the call to Islam. The underlying reasons Byzantine power, which was considered the greatest military force on earth at that time, showed an unjustifiable opposition towards Muslims. As we have already mentioned, their opposition started by killing the ambassador of The Messenger of Allah, PBUH, Al-Harith bin Umair al-Azadi, by Sharhabil bin Amr al-Ghassani. The ambassador was then carrying a message from the Prophet, PBUH, to the ruler of Bizra. We have also stated that the Prophet consequently dispatched a brigade under the command of Zayd bin Haritha, who had a fierce fight against the Byzantines at Mu'tah. Although Muslim forces could not have revenge on those haughty overproud tyrants, the confrontation itself had a great impression on the Arabs all over Arabia. Caesar could neither ignore the great benefit that Mu'tah battle had brought to Muslims, nor could he disregard the Arab tribes' expectations of independence and their hopes of getting free from his influence and reign, nor he could ignore their alliance with the Muslims, realizing all that. Caesar was aware of the progressive danger threatening his borders, especially as Shem fronts, which were neighboring Arab lands. So he concluded that demolition of the Muslim power had grown an urgent necessity. This decision of his should, in his opinion, be achieved before the Muslims become too powerful to conquer, and raise troubles and unrest in the adjacent Arab territories. To meet these exigencies, Caesar mustered a huge army of the Byzantines and pro-Roman Ghassanid tribes to launch a decisive bloody battle against the Muslims. General news about the Byzantines and Ghassanid preparations for war. No sooner news about the Byzantines' preparations for a decisive invasion against Muslims reached Medina than fear spread among them. They started to envisage the Byzantine invasion with the least sound they could hear. This could be clearly worked out of what had happened to Umar bin al-Khattab one day. The Prophet, PBUH, had taken an oath to stay off his wives for a month in the 9th year of al-Hijrah. Therefore, he deserted them and kept them off in a private place. In the beginning, the companions of the Messenger of Allah were puzzled and could not work out the reason for such behavior. They thought the Prophet, PBUH, had divorced them, and that was why he was grieved, disturbed and upset. In Umar's version of the very story he says, "I used to have a helper friend, who often informed me about what happened if I weren't present, and in return, I always informed him of what had taken place during his absence." They both lived in the high part of Medina. Both of them used to call at the Prophet alternatively during that time of suspense. Then one day I heard my friend knock at the door saying, "Open up. Open up." I asked, wondering, "What's the matter? Has the Ghassanid come?" "No, it is more serious than that. The Messenger of Allah, PBUH, has deserted his wives." Sahih al-Bukhari 2730. In another version, Umar said, "We talked about Ghassanid preparations to invade us. When it was his turn to convey the news to me, he went down and returned in the evening. He knocked at the door violently and said, 'Is he sleeping?' I was terrified, but I went out to meet him. Something serious had taken place. He said, 'Has the Ghassanes arrived?' Said I, 'No,' he said, 'it is greater and more serious. The Messenger of Allah, PBUH, has divorced his wives.'" Sahih al-Bukhari 1334. The state of too much alertness manifests clearly the seriousness of the situation that Muslims began to experience. The seriousness of the situation was confirmed to a large degree by the hypocrites' behavior when news about the Byzantines' preparations reached Medina. The fact that the Messenger of Allah, PBUH, won all the battles he fought, and that no power on earth could make him terrified, and that he had always proved to be able to overcome all the obstacles that stood in his way, did not prevent the hypocrites, who concealed evil in their hearts, from expecting an affliction to fall upon the Muslims and Islam. They used to harbor evil and ill intentions against the whole process of Islam and the Muslims. On grounds of illusory hopes of destroying this great religious edifice, they erected a hotbed of conspiracy and intrigue in the form of a mosque, Masjid-e-Darar, the Mosque of Harm. They approached the Prophet, PBUH, with the request that he should come and consecrate the place by praying in it himself. As he was at the moment about to start for Tabuk, he deferred compliance with their request till his return. Meanwhile, he came to know, through divine revelation, that it was not a mosque for devotion and prayer, but a meeting place for the anti-Islamic elements. On his return, therefore, the Prophet, PBUH, sent a party to demolish the new structure. Particular news about the Byzantine and Ghassanid preparations for war magnified. The image of the prominent danger threatening the Muslims' life was carried to them by the Nabateans who brought oil from Ash-Sham to Medina. They carried news about Heraclius' preparations and equipment of an enormous army counting over 40,000 fighters besides Lucum, Judum and other tribes allied to the Byzantines. They said that its vanguard had already reached al-Balqa. Thus was the grave situation standing in ambush for the Muslims. The general situation was aggravated seriously by other adverse factors of too much hot weather, drought, and the rough and rugged distance they had to cover in case they decided to encounter imminent danger. The Messenger of Allah's, PBUH, concept and estimation of the situation and its development was more precise and accurate than all others. He thought that if he tarried or dealt passively with the situation in such a way that might enable the Byzantines to paddle through the Islamic-controlled provinces or to go as far as Medina, this would, amid these circumstances, leave the most awful impression on Islam as well as on the Muslims' military credibility.